You are listening to episode 103 of Mitolife Radio. I'm your host, Matt Blackburn, and today I'm speaking with Mandy Flanders, all about the nervous system, conscious parenting, trauma, polyvagal theory, the bioenergetic field. It's really cool to speak with people like Victor Mifsud, my previous show, and now Mandy, while I'm getting back into biophotons and light and how light affects our cells and the release of our light as far as extreme low frequency ultraviolet light that human beings emit. I was diving pretty deep into that in the past, but I feel like I was missing a big piece, and that piece was the metabolism and stress, which we often overlook. If you're carb deficient, you will be stressed. So having these pieces now and knowing that omega-3s are poisonous and vitamin E is the antidote, and seeing where all the poisons are coming from, okay, here's the antidote, and just bringing everything together, now I have a more full picture of how to preserve my light, meaning the light that's being emitted from my cells, because when you're stressed, you actually emit more light. If you're under artificial light, and you're wearing your work uniform and you have a short sleeve on and your forearms are getting hit with that excessive blue wavelength artificial light and green light, then you will experience physiological stress and you will have an increased amount of light release from your body. AKA, your bioenergetic field is losing power. And all that might sound super esoteric and out there, but Fritz Albert Popp, a lot of really smart people, Konstantin Korotkov, have studied light and its relationship to human health, and they are so interlinked. One of the return guests that I've had on this podcast is Josh Rubin, and he broke down the different phases of the nervous system. And so does Mandy in this episode, from a different direction and using her experience to say it in a different way, which might help someone understand it better. And I think it can't be stated enough, the different branches basically of our nervous system. We have the ventral state, or the parasympathetic, the sympathetic, and then the dorsal, or Mandy calls it the shadow parasympathetic state. I think it's so important for human beings to have this understanding of when they're in certain states, because then they can be self-aware, and if they're stuck in a pattern, they can say, oh, okay, I'm dysregulated, as Mandy says or tells her kid, and okay, just, shift, just do whatever you need, time, space, and shift into a different state. So the reason why this podcast is called Mitolife Radio is for the mitochondria. And these are, as you might have heard in school, the powerhouse of the cell, but they really run the show. And you could have broken engines in your body and they can't generate energy. And, you're slamming fish oils or a pescatarian diet, and you're putting a wrench in your mitochondria's ability to function. And you will experience obesity, weight gain, diabetes, all sorts of emotional disruption, depression, anxiety, whatever. It's all connected to the health of your mitochondria. And so is nervous system balance. Because if you're in a stress state, you cannot absorb sugar as effectively, the primary fuel of the body, aka glucose. If your cortisol is chronically elevated from unresolved trauma, or from a ketogenic diet, or from an intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating diet, that is excess cortisol, and no wonder people are going sugar-free, because the sugar can't get into the cell because they're always stressed. And sometimes the reason is mostly trauma or mostly nutrition-related and restricting a macronutrient like sugar, carbohydrate. Oftentimes, though, it's a mix of both. But whatever ratio of those really depends. And of course, there's environmental. There's so many factors that play into health. Food is just such a small piece. But anyway, we're going to dive in. So enjoy the show. Here is Mandy Flanders. All right, Mandy Flanders, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so exciting.
Yeah, I'm really excited to chat with you. You're actually into a lot of stuff that I've been wanting to research, but I feel like I just don't have the time for it. And so that's the cool thing about this show is I can, just
Outsource.
Outsource. Yeah.
It's perfect.
Yeah, we were talking a lot about the bioenergetic field and the nervous system and traumas and how that all interconnects, which we'll chat about throughout the show. It's a pretty cool. It's kind of fun connecting the dots with all those, right? Because there's so many pieces.
And the nervous system, I think, for complete wellness, which I don't know that anyone ever achieves like full wellness, but the nervous system is really a really big piece that I think is missing for a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. I experienced that firsthand, doing like one meal a day, 1 hour a day, restricting carbs, restricting animal protein. I've done all the extremes and felt how that took me out of balance. And yeah, definitely made it harder to navigate life and to bounce back from stressful events.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so it's interesting because when we fast, it puts our system in a state of stress, and we can either become overactivated or underactivated. And so the nervous system has three states. We have the ventral state, which is our social engagement system. That's when we feel like safe and connected to other people. And then we have the sympathetic mobilization state, which is like the most famous one, which is fight or flight. So that's when we might feel like anxious. We might feel a lot of energy. We might feel like we need to take action or run or fight with somebody. And then the dorsal state is when we are in a state of shutdown. So our system, our whole body is conserving energy because it's essentially preparing for us to die. Like that's the where the system takes us. So it's our shutdown state. But the way that it manifests is we might feel like really low energy, really fatigued, maybe brain fog, indecision, slow moving, stuff like that. It's a very sort of hopeless kind of state.
Sounds like most of humanity, right? At least
I know, it really does. And so we're oscillating. And so we want to be, we want a flexible nervous system. The goal is to be flexible so that you're moving in and out of ventral and you can get back to ventral. But what happens, and then of course our histories compound this, but what happens is we'll have a trigger and then we get stuck in a state. And then people don't know how to come back out. They don't know how to make their way back home to ventral.
And ventral is kind of synonymous with parasympathetic? Or...
Yes. Yeah. And dorsal is also parasympathetic.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like the negative side of that?
Yeah, it's like the shadow side, I guess. But so here's what's interesting too, is that we have a few blended states. So a state of play is ventral blended with sympathetic energy. So you feel safe enough and have energy to engage in play. Or a state of stillness is ventral blended with dorsal energy so that you have enough stillness inside so that you can just be calm. You feel safe enough to be calm. And then there's another blended state that is freeze, which is sympathetic and dorsal. So you have tons of energy inside, but you can't move. It's like the deer in the headlights.
Wow. I wonder if that explains, even though I'm so vocal, like I talk a lot, I feel like I'm an introvert. I mean, I was a quiet child my whole life. My family used to kind of, bring that up. I was just, they would be chatting it up and I would just be quiet in the back seat saying nothing. And I feel like being around people a lot kind of, I need a lot of recovery time. Would that be like I'm in a blended, partly sympathetic state?
Yeah, it could be. And it would depend on what you're feeling internally. And so it could be that you're around people that, and being around people is really activating for you. And then you might need to retreat to recover your nervous system. And then have you heard of the attachment theory?
No, what's that?
So attachment theory is really cool. It's basically how we attach to our primary caregivers. So there's secure attachment, there is anxious ambivalent attachment, there is avoidant, and then there's disorganized. Disorganized attachment is it's more rare. I don't want to say it's like really rare, but it's more rare because it's usually children who suffer a lot of abuse or a lot of trauma in childhood. And so anxious attachment is a lot like a child that wants to be near their parent but is nervous about being near their parent, so they try to connect but don't want to. They're like nervous about it. And then the avoidant attachment shows up as like, I don't really want to connect with you because it doesn't feel safe. And so there's an overlap between the attachments, at least what I have found. There's an overlap between attachment styles and the nervous system states. And so I find that avoidant kind of overlaps with dorsal, and the anxious ambivalent sort of overlaps with sympathetic. And then our ventral and secure attachment systems sort of overlap. And we can have different attachment styles with different people. It's pretty fascinating.
Interesting. So it's not just a parent-child relationship.
No, it's
relationship.
Yeah, and so we'll have like, based on our primary caregiver attachment style, will sort of influence the attachments that we have with other people too.
Wow, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's we were talking about before we started recording, like the bioenergetic field, and I had mentioned to you I took Reiki classes years ago, and how I had just started looking at my biophotons. I have a little camera here that measures like the UV light coming off of the fingertips, and then it maps it to traditional Chinese medicine meridian points.
That's so cool.
And yeah, it's like this Russian technology that basically it gives a digital readout of your field, and the spikes in your light, the specific, you can basically diagnose disease with what organ system the light's connected.
Wow, that is so cool.
Yeah, it's cool to like quantify this stuff, because when I did Reiki, it was all mystical and magical, and now knowing what it was, I don't know if it's evil, but I just feel like, we emit biophotons. Obviously, we're emitting light all the time, and I know that shifts according to my camera. If you're stressed, you actually emit more light generally.
Right, because it's more energy.
Right. Yeah. So I was wondering if that's the kind of a piece too of why, introverts would get drained around people, is because they're taking on their light, which contains information. It's like a physical phenomenon, but
yeah, I mean, I think it could be. It depends, I think, on how the person shows up. So for some people, they may be more avoidant and introverted, and some people may be introverted and take on. It depends how you're showing up in the relationship. And so if you're avoidant, then you're probably not going to take on other stuff from people. But if you're more open to that or have a more anxious attachment, then you may take on more. Wow. Or being around certain people can trigger, different feelings inside. And so being around a certain person may remind you of someone who maybe hurt you in the past, or their voice, or even just a facial expression can trigger that, because we're reading other people's nervous systems all the time. There's like so much that goes into this. So I don't want to like overcomplicate the answer, but we're just always reading, other people's nervous systems. And so it could be so many different factors. And the hope is that we learn to know our nervous system well enough that we can understand, oh, the reason I am tired right now is because I was taking on that energy, because maybe they reminded me of my mom, and I really took care of my mom, and I had to, make sure she was okay. And so I was sort of recreating that dynamic with where I'm at now with this person for some reason because you reminded me of my mom, kind of a thing. Does
Interesting.
that make sense?
Like over empathetic kind of.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And empathy is amazing because that is literally feeling what other people are feeling.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people don't have that ability, right?
I know because everyone is so triggered right now, and it's so sad. So empathy and compassion are really, really important. And the difference between empathy and compassion is compassion means I can hold space for you and your suffering. I see your suffering and I'm witnessing it. Whereas empathy means I'm literally feeling what you're feeling. So
So
compassion, there's like a healthy level of separation almost.
that makes sense. Yeah.
And a lot of people don't have that because when we are triggered and in a state of protection, like sympathetic or dorsal, then we can't have compassion. They don't really align. Because when you're protecting yourself, if you're thinking about being in the woods and there's an animal, a predator coming to attack you, you're not thinking like, oh man, I feel really bad for that tiger. He must be so hungry. Like we're in a state of protection or like that thing is trying to hurt me and I need to get away from it.
That makes sense. Wow. Um, well, we jumped right in. I did want to pick your brain on coffee enemas. We were talking about that before.
We can
um,
backtrack a little bit.
yeah, right. No, well, I'm sure we'll. Yeah, that's really interesting, though. I mean, this all kind of plays a part because uh, I know that if if someone's backed up, like I get a lot of messages about people being constipated.
Oh, yeah.
That could really screw up the nervous system, right?
Well, and the nervous system being dysregulated will screw up your digestion.
Mm.
So, our nervous system is directly linked to our digestive system via the vagus nerve. So, the vagus nerve is the wandering nerve. And if we are dysregulated in any way, then our digestive system is going to be dysregulated. And so, either we're in dorsal shutdown and our digestive system is going to be much slower because we're conserving energy because we're preparing for death, or we're going to be in sympathetic and fight or flight, and our nervous system is going to have a lot more energy. And so our digestive system, food might be like flying through us. Or if we're in that blended state of freeze, then your digestive system is going to be a lot slower, but you might have, other digestive symptoms. Pretty much every digestive issue is related to some sort of trauma or nervous system dysregulation.
Wow. Yeah, because I know irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease,
Yeah,
colitis, like
all
those are
trauma.
epidemics right now.
They're all trauma related. And so we can have traumas that are really severe, like various forms of abuse, or we can have trauma like medical trauma. So if a child is born via C-section and then the baby goes to the nursery and isn't connected to mom, that's traumatic for the baby. And even in some cases, surrogate birth, and this might be like a big trigger for some people to hear, but surrogacy can actually be traumatic for the baby also because the baby is grown in a woman that it thinks is its mother. And then immediately after birth, the baby's taken from the birth woman and then given to the biological parent. So there's an attachment separation there.
Wow, I never even thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had a few questions about like C-section, cesarean birth. Like I was one, and that seems to affect. I mean, there's circumcision. There's so many like you know hits right
Mm-hmm.
from the beginning getting
Oh,
hit.
yeah. And even before that, so how you're conceived can actually shape your nervous system, which
Are you
is
talking
like,
about like if someone was conceived through rape or something that would
hmm
affect? Wow.
yeah, or if you're conceived in love, or how your mother felt at the time that she found out she was pregnant with you.
Mm.
And the good news is, like, I don't want it to sound terrifying because the good news is all of this stuff is we can heal from it.
Mm.
And it's important to uncover these pieces because we learn more about ourselves that way. We can learn, oh, well, this is why I have a hard time being in relationship with people because my biology will not allow me to go there because my body doesn't believe that it's safe. Or this
Wow.
is why I have a hard time parenting my one child, because this child triggers me endlessly because my biology perceives this child as a threat, or this behavior, not the child, but the behavior that the child is, doing.
That's interesting. So, what's the connection with the vagus nerve and the polyvagal theory that you mentioned before we started recording?
Yeah, so the vagus nerve is connected to the polyvagal theory because that's what Stephen Porges based the theory off of.
Hmm.
And so the vagus nerve is the wandering nerve, and there's three parts to it, or there's, I think, even more parts to it. But our ventral nervous system is connected, it's in our face and in the chest. And so that is where and it's connected to the cranial nerves in the face via the vagus nerve. And then it goes down into the heart area and then into the gut. And so that is like the line of the vagus nerve. Did that make sense? Did I explain that okay? Okay.
It does, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I actually just got a little machine. I mean, it was like $30, because I like toys and trying different health things, and this
Yeah.
was pretty cheap. But supposedly, it's just something you clip on your ear, and it's supposed to stimulate that. But I know breathing exercises, certain ones, and humming could do it as well, right? So there's like multiple
hmm
ways to stimulate it, or and maybe you don't even want it. Do you want to stimulate it? That's
I
like,
think it depends. So when you're healing from trauma, and it depends where you're at in your nervous system. So if you're down regulated, if you are in dorsal, stimulating it would be helpful. But if you're in sympathetic, stimulating it might be too much energy. And so you might want to sort of down regulate and allow yourself to calm down.
that makes sense. Because if
hmm
you're already stimulated, it'll just bring you up to another level.
And so with the vagus nerve states, so it is literally, if you think of it as like a ladder, it's a hierarchy. So there's the ventral on the top, and then parasympathetic in the middle, and then at the bottom of the ladder is dorsal. And we move in and out of the states in that order. So we'll be in ventral and then move to sympathetic and then move to dorsal. And then we'll move from dorsal to sympathetic back to ventral. So for some people who are in dorsal chronically, moving to sympathetic feels terrifying because they're not used to having that much energy. But you have to move through sympathetic in order to get to ventral, which is that socially engaged, calm, connected, at peace state.
Mm,
And then,
that
so
makes
for people who want to move into ventral, it may not feel safe for them because connection maybe wasn't safe.
wow. Is there a connection with the brain states? Like I've always looked at like delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma, and epsilon, all these different things.
I think probably, I don't know enough about that. But my guess is yes, because I think everything in the body is connected. Nothing happens in our body in a vacuum. It's so funny because I'll get messages from people and they're like, so I just found out that I have hyperthyroid or hypothyroid and I have endometriosis, but they're probably not connected.
Mm,
And I'm like, no, they're absolutely connected. We just want to uncover where the connection is and then what the root is. And so,
mhm.
so for some people, the root might be childhood trauma, or it could be like a car accident that created trauma, or it could be a horrible diet, or it could be how you feel about the food that you're eating. There's like so many areas and facets that it could go into.
And do you think if a person's ready, like the more they do at once without stressing themselves out about it, like the faster they'll kind of heal, or the faster they'll process and get through?
Yes and no. So I have found with nervous system work specifically, it's slow. And that's the most frustrating part for people because, especially people who have had childhood trauma, um, they want to feel better like right away. But as you're opening up this container of the nervous system and learning how to feel safe in ventral, which was probably not a safe place for a lot of people, it can feel disorienting and not good for a little while until you teach your nervous system that this is actually a safe place to be. And so once you bridge that gap then healing can be really, really quick and fast, and you can do a lot more without the guidance of a practitioner. But up until that point, it can take, like, sometimes you need some hand holding. I know I did in my process. I needed a lot of hand holding.
So what are some main tools that you use? I'm aware of like Pia Melody, like was it post induction method, and there's all these different
Hmm.
forms of like moving through trauma. What do you have in your toolbox that you use?
Um, I use a variety of things. I like to work with people a lot on the somatics of where they're at. And so when we're in a session, I want to know, as they're telling me a story, and I mentioned this before we started recording, our physiology, our body will change, the sensations will change first, and then our mind will create a story about what we're feeling to try to make sense of it. And so, as someone's telling me their story, I want to know what is going on in their body, because the body is our subconscious. The body is where the nervous system is. The body is not in the conscious mind. The trauma, the wounding is not in the conscious mind. So you can't talk your way out of into feeling better. You have to feel your way into feeling better. And so that happens slowly over time, and usually with somebody who is safe, that you can be in your feelings with. And I'm not talking about just emotions, I mean like actual physical sensations. So many people have dissociated from their bodies that they can't even tell you, my leg hurts, because they're not even aware that they have legs.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. 'Cause I get people messaging me about detox symptoms from, say, vitamin E or Sheila
Mhm.
G, whatever, and I'm saying, well, this rash showed up. What does it mean? I'm like, well, it could mean anything. Like,
Yeah.
if you want to keep moving through, maybe check your drinking water and stuff. But that's
And we
interesting.
we detox emotions when we're detoxing the physical stuff too. That was part of my story on the topic of coffee enemas. So I started doing coffee enemas when I was healing and recovering from toxic mold poisoning. And I had eaten what I thought was a really clean diet. I was eating completely plant-based, and like everything was organic, drinking the best water I could get my hands on. Everything was like perfect. And I got myself to a certain point and I wasn't getting better. So then I started adding in animal proteins once again and eating more animal fat. And then I was starting to do coffee enemas, and that's when it started to accelerate my healing. However, as I was doing the coffee enemas, I was having a very strong visceral emotional detox also, that I thought was a physical detox because it's all sensation.
Wow.
And so learning about the nervous system, I was like, what the heck am I feeling? This feels crazy. It felt like anxiety and like heart racing and all this stuff. But then I started doing trauma healing and trauma work, and my healing like took off. And I'm back. I'm better than I was before the mold.
Wow, that's great.
Mhm.
Cool. Yeah, it's funny. Animal products and coffee are like a match made in heaven. Like they go so well together.
They
Like there's
do. And
my
sugar. Don't forget the
yeah,
sugar.
yeah, yeah, maple syrup or
Oh
whatever
yeah.
you're into. But that's pretty cool. Yeah, I stopped doing coffee enemas, which is why I want to talk. I've just been like picking people's brain on them. Like um, Jessica Ash had some interesting things to say, and then some other people I've had on because I I guess I just see people take it to the extreme where it's like one every single day, and I'm like that can't be healthy. But maybe there's a place for one a week or one a month or something.
And I think
Uh,
it depends on the person. Because
mhm.
for me, I did one every single day for 2 months. And then I found that I didn't need that anymore. And so if I'm aware of my sensations in my body, and I was at that point acutely aware of everything to the point of hypervigilance because I was so traumatized from the mold that I noticed, every sensation that was occurring. But I got to a place where I was like, oh, I don't think I need a coffee enema. Like I feel good enough. I'm not having pain. I'm not feeling sluggish. I'm not feeling tired. And I was getting to a place where I didn't need them anymore. Now I probably do them like once a month, if that.
That's cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like liver focusing because uh, I had acne and eczema and skin issues my whole life.
Hmm.
Uh, it just, I mean, that's a sign that the liver's backed up, right?
Yeah. Anything on the skin is connected to the liver usually.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about dreaming because um, I guess I need to get better at like having my hand held because I try to do everything myself. I'm like, no,
Yeah.
I got it. I can do it myself. But
Yeah. I know
I,
that very well.
I started a dream journal when I was like, I don't know, 11 years old. And I was on lucid dreaming forums and my old PC. I started typing out my dreams, and I keep a little notebook by my bed and
Hmm.
totally, I believe it helped me get to where I am today because I know dreaming is like a direct connection to your subconscious mind.
Yeah.
And I've had like two prominent lucid dreams that I remember every detail where I like cried like the next day, like getting out of the dream. And it was like I
Wow.
processed something that I couldn't have processed before.
Yeah, and dreaming allows that to happen in a safe way.
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
And it's all dreaming is interesting because it's all symbolic. We'll have dreams about people, but it's not actually about the person. It's about what the person represents for us. And so it
Interesting.
could be a characteristic, it could be like a tone of voice, it could be this person reminds me of my parent or my friend, whatever that means for us.
That's interesting. Have you ever delved into that, like research, like the whole dreaming for trauma thing? Because I'm pretty sure there's books on it.
Not really. My focus lately has really been on the polyvagal theory and nervous system. But I know that there is a lot of information out there and it can be really helpful for people.
hmm Do you feel
Yeah.
that people that are stuck in the like stressed state, or I guess the dorsal state, where they like lose their hunger, like is it good to force themselves to eat, even if it's like small things like some bone broth and a little bit of fruit, or just like frequent to because if they fast, it just kind of drives them deeper, right?
I think so. Yeah. I'm of the belief that frequent meals are important, or if not frequent, but at least regular.
hmm Yeah, I recently went through a little breakup, and it was interesting knowing what I know, like going through that process of healing from it,
Yeah.
and um, yeah, I totally lost my appetite completely, 100%. But I just focused on liquids and
Hmm.
milk, broth, and lighter things.
And
Um,
easy to digest things like cooked veggies too. That's why, like, if we eat seasonally, so like in the wintertime, we're supposed to eat more like cooked veggies and things like that, and even like heartier meals because depending on where you live, it's colder. So you want to eat heartier meals that fill you up and, you know, increase your body temperature so that you're warmer and also that you can digest it more easily. And in the summertime is when people, if you eat leafy greens, I know you don't, but if people eat leafy greens, that's when you would want to do that, is more in the summer when it's hotter and there's more energy that you can expend on that.
that makes sense. Yeah, I find I need a lot of red meat, even just once a day at least, and that keeps my hands warm, and I feel like that really
Hmm.
helps metabolism to have that dense protein source and
Yeah.
saturated.
And the nervous system needs fat and the nervous system needs protein. And depending on where you're at in your healing journey, if you are like really in the thick of trauma healing, you need more protein and more fat than you might at other times in where you're at in your life, other seasons of your life.
And not PUFAs, right? Because
No poofas. I
yeah,
won't even go there on this, on this episode.
I'm sure there's a deep, I mean, there has to be a connection with the, yeah, because lipofuscin accumulates in the neuronal cells. So you can't make a big magnetic field, as big of a magnetic field, that it shuts down the neuronal mitochondrial respiration process. So
Yeah,
interesting.
that makes so much sense. And so you need like the right type of fat, and animal protein to be able to fuel the nervous system and the thyroid, because the thyroid gets stressed when we have trauma, and same with the adrenals.
Hmm. Absolutely. So what else do we have here? I had well, the bioenergetic field. I guess we kind of talked a little bit about that. um, I guess we can kind of jump with the questions because I'm sure that'll lead us to some interesting discussions.
Yeah.
Uh, there are some good ones here. Um, how to deal with rage when it comes to parenting and being burnt out.
Yeah. That's really that's a good one. And so when our kiddos trigger us, it's very often because they are showing us places within us that are not healed. And it's the same if we have a trigger with anybody that we encounter. So if we have someone, and our kids just do it more often than like a stranger would. So if we have a child who is triggering us, then it's because we have a wound in that place. Like maybe we were not allowed to express anger, or maybe we are not, our emotions were not safe with our caregivers. So it kind of depends on what the experience is and what is being triggered and what the child's behavior is that will help sort of move through that process. But I would encourage, if you feel rage towards your children, to really try to find a way to ground and feel that, and then allow yourself to discharge that energy in a healthy way, and maybe even away from the child. So maybe, taking a time out and going and punching a pillow, or like taking a bat to the ground or something, like just doing something physical to really discharge that energy so that it's not stored or getting stuck in the nervous system.
Makes sense. Yeah, I smashed a stool on TikTok yesterday. It felt
Oh yeah,
pretty
I saw that. That must have been very cathartic.
good. It was falling apart. People got on me like, you're buying a China product, blah blah.
How
uh,
dare you?
what's funny? What I grew up with an older brother, and we were into like Legos. And this one time, my we were like, we fought sometimes. One
Hmm.
time, I got angry at him, and I kicked his Lego little castle or whatever he built. It took him like all day to build. And my mom just loses it, and she calls my dad. She's like, "You need to come home from work right now."
Oh
So that
no.
question made me think of that. Yeah. They did a great
Yeah.
job.
And yes, and I want to touch on that too, because a lot of times when we're healing trauma, like we don't want to see our parents as bad people, but they're humans and they have their own wounds and they did the best that they could with what they have. And there's also space for us to be upset with the way that they did things because maybe it wasn't the way that we needed. So they did what they could and they did it to the very best of their ability, but maybe it didn't meet our needs, or maybe it left some kind of an imprint, in some way, or a rupture in an attachment. And it doesn't mean that they are terrible people. It just means that they're wounded, and that was their bandwidth, that was their capacity.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's to me one of the coolest things about uh, the family structure is like each generation of children we could upgrade, and, versus the downgrading that's being forced upon us.
It's so crazy. Yeah, exactly. And we have the opportunity to really elevate our children. And honestly, that's kind of why I am in this work, is selfishly because I want my kids to live in a really conscious world where people are trauma informed and they are compassionate and they know how to regulate their nervous system and they know how to say, oh, I'm dysregulated right now. Like these are terms that I use in my house. I'm like, to my daughter, I'm like, I can tell you're dysregulated. What do you need right now that will help you feel better? Do you need a snack? Do you need a hug? Do you want to go watch, like listen to a story? How can we help you get back to a place that you feel calmer? And these are just terms that I want and hope that everybody can use in their vocabulary, and that it's just normal, and that our kids can go to school and be like, I'm really dysregulated right now. you know?
I remember seeing a video. I can't remember. It was some like liberal college or something, and they were like they were overly sensitive. And I wanted to ask you about this topic because
Yeah.
there were like people up at a podium, doing these little speeches, and they were so. I mean, it was like snowflake style, where they're like, don't like clapping is not healthy for our nervous system. So if you could just like make a signal in the audience, I was like, whoa, this is like scary stuff. And
I
so,
actually think I saw that. I know which one you're talking about. And so for people like that, that's obviously pretty intense nervous system dysregulation, where any sort of external stimulation is overstimulating.
mhm,
And it's like, it's literally too much. They cannot think, and it sends them into a trauma response, a protective state of being, because it's just too overwhelming for their system. And I would wonder if that person had a really loud childhood, like a very loud, maybe belligerent father or mother who got really angry and loud, and maybe even was abusive physically toward them. And that's what that reminds them of subconsciously.
that's interesting because I know people could take this too far, and I'll use the word snowflake jokingly, like snowflake generation, like easily triggered and overly sensitive, because that's like that means that people are way out of balance, right? If they can't take a joke or something like that, like
Yeah, it means their nervous system is very dysregulated. And even
mm,
for ourselves, because there are times where like right now, I have an infant who's 9 months old, and she hardly slept last night. And so if my husband looks at me a weird way, I might be like, what the hell, man? Like, why are you coming at me? You know? But on a different day, when I've gotten more sleep and I feel more regulated, he could do the same thing or make a joke, and it would be fine.
mm,
So much of it can vary depending on our sleep, depending on our food, if we're getting our basic needs met, because that will throw off our nervous systems too.
that makes sense. Yeah, that's why I used to be trigger happy at blocking people, but now I'll give them two or three messages, and I'm like, okay, if it's the same, they're blocked for life. But if it's like one here and there, like, okay, I'll let it go.
Yeah, and it takes a lot. It takes a lot. So I had a post the other day about, I think it was coping, one of my coping posts, and someone was like, this is the dumbest list I've ever seen. I was like, wow, okay. And initially I felt really triggered by that. And then he said something else, I forget what. But I just was like, you know what? This person is very severely dysregulated. So I just wrote and said, thank you so much for your feedback. Like,
Yeah.
okay. It doesn't have to mean, something about me. But
Yeah.
humans love making meaning about our experiences. And so when we're triggered, it's because it's hitting on an old wound. And our job is to uncover what that wound is and clear out the infection so that it no longer hurts anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then you're less reactive to things when they
Oh,
happen.
yeah. And when we've paid attention to our own stuff, our own wounds, then we can have a lot more compassion for other people and their suffering, because it doesn't feel like a personal attack anymore. It feels like, oh, this person is really hurt, or they're really sad. They're seeing me as someone that represents pain or whatever to them. I had a mentor who used to say, I'm witnessing your suffering.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah. Cause I think uh, my friend was saying like the worst thing you could say to someone, and I've seen posts about this, is like, it's going to be okay. Like that's not helpful, right? For
Hmm.
someone.
Yeah. And for some people, that can feel invalidating, like, you're okay. It's going to be okay. Like when a little child falls and we're like, you're okay. Well, my child is crying and they don't feel like they're okay because that's the worst thing that's happened to them up until this point.
It's like like I just got a book on gaslighting, because I feel like
That's happening all over the place right now.
yeah, there's religious gaslighting,
Yeah.
just pray about it or whatever, which does not help. Or there's different,
Yep.
there's all different types of gaslighting, but yeah, it's crazy.
Oh yeah, the media is gaslighting everybody all the time right now.
Yeah, it's a form of like narcissistic trauma, from my understanding. Like
Yeah,
nar- narcissistic abuse, I meant to say. Yeah.
it
Uh,
is. And if you can imagine, the narcissists that are doing the gaslighting are also people who have been severely abused themselves,
mm,
which is really hard. It's hard for us to have compassion for people who are abusive because we just want to see them as the monster. But then when we do our own inner healing work, we can see them as severely dysregulated and someone I don't want to go near. Like I can protect myself from this person, but I also don't have to hate you anymore because I know that you're severely wounded.
yeah, that sounds pretty freeing. Less
It
less.
is. It takes a lot. It's a lot of work.
Someone asked, how can we break from generational trauma? I never really understood that phrase, because I mean, some people talk about like trauma stored in our DNA. Is that
Yeah.
where it's from?
It's both. So we have trauma stored in our DNA. Our cells remember. So there have been studies done on like Holocaust survivors, and that genetic memory is passed down, or like even people in the Great Depression who didn't have access to food. That's passed down in their memory, their cells. So they'll like hold on to more fat because their cells are programmed to remember this famine. And so there's that part of it, but then there's also like the attachment and nervous system parts. So if our parents were raised by people who are really wounded and were not doing any inner work, and their parents were raised by people who are also really wounded, or there's like a line of sexual abuse in the family, or physical abuse, then those traumas can be passed down even if they're not abusing the child. It's in their nervous system. So the way that they behave around the child or toward the child can be generationally abusive, even if it's not overtly abusive. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And it sounds like, I mean, then there's human species trauma, right? Because it's
Yes.
pretty bloody, and lots of murder and rape our entire history.
Oh, yeah. We're pretty wild. It's pretty amazing. Like, if you look at our history, how much the human race has been through, but also how much we can heal and we can bring ourselves back to a place of homeostasis, even if it's just for a few minutes a day. Because most of us are walking around with dysregulated nervous systems, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be like a really horrible thing because we ultimately want to know that we can bring ourselves back to this ventral state, even if it's just for a really brief moment.
Hmm.
Or like
That's
be
awesome.
in a safe connection with another person, even if that's just for a really brief moment. And if connecting with people is not safe, we can connect with animals, or we can go outside and feel connected to nature. Those things are also co-regulating.
That's good news, because those are my only two options out here.
Perfect. Yeah, you can co-regulate with your goats.
Right? That's funny. This is a good one. How to heal trauma from narcissistic mental abuse. Kind of in line with what we were just talking about.
Yeah, this one is heavy. Um, and narcissism can be overt or covert. It might be that you have an overt narcissist who is gaslighting you and um, being really overtly abusive, or you might have a covert narcissist who just doesn't really pay enough attention to you or makes everything about them uh, in more subtle ways. And healing from that is a process, and it has to happen slowly and gently. You don't want to jar your nervous system. So just start by allowing yourself to recognize that the dynamic is not healthy and that the dynamic is not safe. and starting to reclaim your own inner power by noticing your feelings and your sensations when you are interacting with somebody who's narcissistic, noticing how that makes you feel. Because the thing with narcissism is that you will start to question your reality, and you'll question, is what I'm even feeling, is that even true? Can I trust myself? And so you're just trying to start learning how to be safe with the sensations that you feel so that it isn't scary and that you can trust yourself. And then moving, slowly away from that person, or quickly away from that person if it's a really abusive situation.
Mm. And maybe connecting with others too that you can be safe with and
Yeah, yeah.
too.
Yes, exactly. That's a really good point. Moving toward safer connections with people who can hold space for you. Someone who you can talk about this with, who will listen and not judge the other person or judge you. Somebody who can hold space and be supportive, so that your story can be heard, because that can be really validating also, and really helpful and supportive.
That's awesome. I don't know if we covered this, but what does trauma do to your body? I mean, it affects every organ and gland and system,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah, everything. So if you think about being in a state of protection, so like a sympathetic state where you're mobilized and you're active, your muscles are tense. Your whole physiology is tense and constricted, and you're ready to fight. So then your muscles will become tight and you'll start having chronic pain. Fibromyalgia is linked to trauma. And so you might start manifesting with joint pain or with muscle pain or with chronic headaches because of the muscle tension. Your blood sugar might become imbalanced. You might have a weakened immune system because your energy is going to your limbs so that you can fight and flee. Or if you're in a state of dorsal shutdown, you're not assimilating nutrients with the food that you're eating, if you're even eating much food anyway. And then you're becoming more mineral deficient because you're not using the food in a healthy way.
That makes sense. This is a really good one. Can guilt and shame cause weight gain? If so, what is the best way to remedy that?
Yeah, I think that they can. And also, if you are feeling ashamed of how you look, that's tied into it. And we're holding on to these emotions. And I would also look at what other things are being held on to in the body. Are there feelings that you're not allowing yourself to feel or express? What other things are constricted and being stuck in the body? And then once you start to notice those things and allowing yourself to explore what might be underneath the shame, where did the shame originate, or where did the guilt originate? And is the guilt something that belongs to you, or is it something that belongs to somebody else? And how can you sort of allow yourself to start to put those pieces together? The weight, from what I have found in my own experience, is that weight will come off as you start to free up space inside of you. So the more emotions and tension and stress that you're holding on to, the more that stuff is going to kind of stay stuck.
That makes sense. Yeah, I talk to a lot of people. Women will message me and say, like, my belly fat will not go away, whatever I do. And
Hmm.
now, they're on vitamin E and they're doing all the things. And now I've been starting to think, there's probably a bigger emotional, psychological, emotional component going on.
And if you're in a state of sympathetic activation, then you're going to have a lot of cortisol flowing through your body, and cortisol will hold weight too. So allowing yourself to just explore this ventral state, allowing yourself to remember a time that you felt really safe and connected to another person or an animal or in nature, just sitting for a moment, like when have I felt this? And if it's with not in your reach, if you can't think of a time that you felt that, then create a time that you might have felt something like that. Make it up, because our brain doesn't know that it's happening or not happening. And our brain thinks that everything's happening all right now. It doesn't know that it's happened in the past and that it's over and done with, which is why trauma is so impactful, because our brain hasn't processed the fact that the trauma is no longer occurring. And that's why triggers are triggering, because of that same reason. The brain doesn't know that this person isn't the person who hurt you the first time. It's just the same wound that's being like reactivated.
Is that why movies are so addictive? Because like Adam Bergstrom that I've had on said,
Mhm.
sometimes someone needs, instead of a diet or a protocol or whatever, they just need to watch a shoot 'em up killer movie to let that, because you experience what the characters in the movie are doing, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and it can activate your nervous system, and that's why, like, when there's a sad scene, you might cry,
Hmm.
because our nervous system is reading the other person's nervous system, and we've got mirror neurons in our brain, and so our mirror neurons are going to feed off of the other person's nervous system. And so, if you're with somebody who feels excited or nervous, it might make you feel excited or nervous, or it may be off-putting to you because it's a lot of energy if you're not used to it.
Hmm.
If you're in a more dorsal state and somebody's really excited, it might feel exciting to you, or it might feel like, whoa, that's too much. I need to back away.
um, Healing from trauma of regret of not talking to someone before they died.
Mm, yeah, that one. I can feel the sadness there. So, because our brains don't know what's happening, like it doesn't know time. So, with this, you might even do an exercise where you close your eyes and visualize the person in front of you and say all of the things that you would have wanted to say to them. Because our brain doesn't really know, that that person's not right in front of us. Or you might have like a pillow, or if you have a really good friend who could role play with you, then that friend could sit in front of you and not say anything and just hold the space while you told your friend um, all the things that you wanted to say to this person, a friend or a loved one.
That's
It's a
interesting.
Yeah, it's a really, actually really powerful exercise. And I don't know if that sounds like crazy or weird or whatever, but it's really healing and really powerful. Our brains are like so unbelievable, the things that we are capable of.
That's awesome. Um, what to do when you have PTSD symptoms but no memory of the trauma?
Work with a practitioner. Because our brains will sort of encapsulate the trauma and work around it so that we don't have to remember it, because it was so overwhelming for our nervous systems that it will just completely black it out. And working with PTSD, I would just encourage to do things that feel really, really nourishing and feel really safe in your body. So something that feels like, for some people, folding laundry is just like really, you can be present, it can be really methodical, or even washing the dishes. Taking a slow walk even could be really helpful, or a fast walk if your nervous system is really activated. It depends how the PTSD is showing up for you. But just doing things that are really nourishing, and also working with a practitioner to sort of uncover the deeper layers of that work.
That's awesome. Yeah. Um, Before we started recording, I was telling you about my hypnotherapy session,
Oh,
and
yeah.
what stood out to me is like I didn't have I had a few memories from that experience, but it was mostly physical sensations, like
Hmm.
feeling like I was running a marathon, my heart was pounding out of my chest, and I was just lying there.
Yep.
Um, Interesting that the physical sensations, like the body remembers that.
Yeah, and there's a really good book, I don't know if you've heard of it, called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And it's an amazing book on trauma, and it teaches you how the body stores trauma. So even if the mind doesn't remember it, your body is your subconscious and your body remembers it. So you could be out for a walk and someone could give you a funny look or what you perceive to be a funny look, and it could set off a whole cascade of symptoms because you're being reactivated. And even though you don't consciously remember, your body does remember.
Wow. Um, I wanted to ask, have you ever heard of the book, The Emotion Code? I remember my friend gave that to me years ago.
Yeah, so emotion code is interesting for me. I like emotion code um for like really superficial things, but for healing trauma, I found it does not work at all. And a lot of people don't want to go into their traumas because re-feeling everything that you've experienced in the past is like the worst sounding thing that you could do. Like, why would you ever want to do that? But when you move through it with a supportive person, because you've already survived it, when you move through it with a supportive person, the other side of that is a lot more space and much more inner freedom and peace.
That makes sense. We had a few questions on birth trauma. Um, Recent home birth ended in a cesarean,
Mm.
baby born with forceps. So I guess any in general like birth traumas.
Yeah, I mean, our birth experiences can shape us, mothers and children. And, it's funny, I was just talking about this with someone the other day. So my daughter was a home birth and her birth was really, really fast. It was an hour and a half long. And I felt like afterwards, my body was in shock from her birth because my nervous system, my brain didn't have the chance to catch up with how fast it was. And so I felt like I was in shock for almost 5 years until my third baby was just born. And her birth sort of was like closure for my other daughter's birth. And so we have these experiences that shape us. And the way that I would go about it with your child is just to really focus on having connections in ways that feel safe for both of you. So maybe if your baby is really little and you're nursing or bottle feeding, just connecting while you're feeding the baby and not being on the phone and just being really present with your baby. Or if your baby's crying, being really present with the baby, and soothing the baby and checking in with your nervous system and trying to regulate the nervous system so that you aren't feeling totally dysregulated as your baby is crying. Um, I hope that helps. There's like so many more aspects that I could go into with that.
Yeah, well, that's good. This is kind of a good segue. Someone asked, any tips for when the toddler denies being upset when they obviously are? We try to validate and welcome all feelings in our home.
So I would look at the parents and see if the parents are not allowing themselves to feel anything. If there's any emotions that they're sort of holding back. And not that they have to express with the child, but just in general, because our kiddos' nervous systems are constantly picking up on our nervous systems and what we are giving off. And so also sometimes if we are upset and our kids can recognize that, we may want to even just vocalize, mommy's upset or daddy's upset right now. I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. I'm just feeling kind of sad. Those things can really help because it then teaches our children that feelings are okay to feel and that we don't have to hide them. But also, another thing that you could do is like encourage your child to paint or draw a picture of their feelings or draw a picture of like a sad face and then draw a picture of a animal that's sad or an animal that's happy, doing some sort of creative process with it because that gets into the right side of the brain and allows the child to process whatever's coming up. And without making meanings out of their drawings, just allowing them to draw. And, if we want to comment saying like, oh, that's really good. That's a good drawing. Great work, whatever, something like that. But not commenting on, oh, what does this mean for you? Just allowing them to have their own process.
And that works for adults too, right? Like I know
Yeah.
Ray Pete's a big fan of painting and paint therapy for the brain.
Oh yeah, it's huge. Painting, like classical kind of music is really good too. And it moves you into the right brain, which is where trauma is stored and is in the right side of the brain. And so it helps to access and process.
Hmm, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Hmm.
Um, Someone asked, how to gentle parent a really difficult toddler, and any book suggestions on parenting toddlers.
Yeah. So let me think. I feel like I have tons of book recommendations, but I can't think of anything right now. There's a book called, it's not really parenting difficult children. It's called How to Trauma Proof Your Kids by Peter Levine. It's really, really good. But it has different exercises in there. When I find that when children are really, really difficult, it could be birth trauma. It could be an attachment separation from one or both of the primary caregivers. And also it could be that the parent has unresolved trauma. And so looking at those different aspects can help you to show up and be the parent that you want to be, without sort of unleashing your own wounds onto your kiddos. So just exploring, what is the emotion or the behavior that's really triggering for me in my child, and what is it about that that's triggering, and just kind of asking yourself questions around that experience so that you can uncover bit by bit, little by little, what is underneath it for you. Very often our children that are most difficult for us are actually the mirrors for our own wounds.
Wow, that makes sense. Um,
Same with
yeah,
our partners.
maybe there's a little bit. It sounds like something's hitting. Is it maybe your mic cord?
Oh,
It sounds like
maybe.
crashing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I just want to see if you could adjust something in it, but um, let me see
Yeah, I
here.
talk with my hands a lot, so maybe I'll stop doing that.
um, Bed sharing with the breastfed 14-month-old who rolls around all night. To crib or not to crib?
That is a very personal situation. Some parents are totally fine with that and don't mind it. Other parents have a much harder time, with that. And if it's interfering with your sleep to the point that you are unable to parent the way that you want to, then it may be worth it to start transitioning to a crib.
Awesome. Severe health anxiety, symptom obsession, hypochondriac tendencies. Uh, any suggestions for that?
That sounds a lot like trauma. And exploring the feelings underneath that, um, looking to, what are the fears and the physical sensations that are coming up in the body. And that might point some clues into what's going on, because very often we will create situations. Hypochondria is just like severe nervous system dysregulation. Like, we want to make sense of the horrible stuff that we're feeling inside, so we put a label on it and say, well, this is what's wrong with me, but it's not. It's almost never the case that that's what it is. It's usually just like our body is so dysregulated and stressed out that we have to feel through that, usually with a practitioner or someone who's really good at holding space for you, to be able to move through the discomfort of those feelings.
Interesting. Yeah, a lot of people are obsessed with their symptoms. I noticed that's like most people. They're like, "What does this mean? What does that mean?"
Because everyone wants to feel seen and heard, like we all want to feel gotten, we all want to feel felt. And so if we have symptoms, then we feel like we can gain deeper insights into ourselves, and we feel like, oh, maybe this person can see me and see that I'm suffering. And that's not the case for everybody, but for a lot of people it can be. And so just exploring, like, oh yeah, I'm feeling crummy and that's okay, or I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling lonely, I'm feeling tired, and those things are okay. There's nothing inherently wrong with feeling those things. Our society has made it so that feeling anything is really, really bad. This is why we numb out with prescription medication and why we numb out our whole birth experience, because we've been taught that feeling pain or feeling sadness or feeling grief is really, really bad and that it's wrong. And that's not true. We have moved so far away from it. I feel like even in other cultures, they used to have like grief rituals. So someone passes away, then there's an entire ceremony. And like we have a funeral, but there would be like actual rituals for helping people move through the grief and process it. And now people are like, oh, you're not over that yet? Like that person passed away years ago. You're not over that yet? Like, no, grief doesn't know time. Like you can process and be grieving something years later, especially if you didn't process it well the first time around.
Hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, and I've also heard of cultures that do absolutely nothing when a person dies, like in the tribe. Like they don't have any ceremony at all. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty wild.
I know. Yeah, so interesting. There's a lot of
um,
ways to be a human.
yeah, yeah, it might have been the Hazda, I think, or the Maur. Yeah, I think the Hazda. I'm pretty sure. Um, this is a really big question. Is it possible to fully heal from trauma?
Yes and no. We can get to a place, it depends what you mean by heal. So we can get to a place where we feel peace. We can get to a place where we feel safe and at home in our bodies and in the world, where we don't feel like the world is out to get us. But we're never likely going to get to a place where we don't have any triggers ever. But we get to a place where if we are dysregulated, we can come back home to regulation much more easily rather than staying stuck there. So it really, I think, just depends on what you mean by fully heal.
Yeah, I mean, and there's always going to be new traumas that come up, right?
Oh,
Smaller or big.
yeah. And if you have unresolved childhood trauma, then you have new traumas, and then it can have sort of a compounding effect. But if you have worked through a lot of childhood trauma, then new trauma, the working through the old trauma creates a lot of resiliency so that you can bounce back from traumatic situations much more quickly.
Hmm, that makes sense.
And then you don't have to be stuck in these uncomfortable feelings that, a lot of people don't want to be stuck in.
Hmm. That's actually all of the trauma questions. The rest are like food questions.
Cool.
um, yeah. What should we be eating every day to be healthy? What food should we cut out? People are so confused about that.
I
I mean,
know. I know. And it is confusing. And I think there's some element of biodiversity, some element of like where you're at on your polyvagal ladder and what you can digest. And also, um, foods that like taste good, because you don't want to deprive yourself of like good tasting food too, because we do have to live in this world. So like sometimes it's okay to eat sweet treats, and sometimes it's okay to eat junk food or to go eat out at your favorite restaurant and not be so restrictive, because restriction creates more stress too. So I personally don't agree with eliminating entire food groups. I feel like all of humanity has eaten all kinds of food groups. I think eating organ meats is really important. I think eating animal muscle meat is important. I think, healthy animal fats, root vegetables, fruit, all of that is super important and super nourishing to the nervous system too.
did you ever get into like you said you were plant based, like the vegetable juicing thing?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we all did.
I did celery juice for a long time. And then for a while, like after I did it for probably every day for a couple of months, and then I started to have horrible acid reflux. And I
Wow.
think that it like wreaked havoc on my digestive system. So then I started looking into the medical medium and was like, this guy doesn't have any education. Like he's getting his information from source. which is interesting. And I think, maybe there's some truth to that. I don't know. But everything that I found, like, not everything is Epstein-Barr.
Mm.
Not everything is um, whatever he says it is. I
Yeah,
think Lyme is way more prevalent than Epstein-Barr, and mold is way more prevalent than Epstein-Barr.
and eggs feed viruses.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of ways to be a human.
Yeah, when I was recovering from raw veganism for years and years, I was doing I think like 12, like at 1 to 2 dozen raw egg yolks a day, like pastured egg yolks. And
Yeah.
I feel like even though there's a lot of PUFA, I think there's like 1 gram of PUFA per egg. There's also choline and B vitamins, and protein.
Oh,
That
yeah.
that that and oysters, like really, I think that those were key for my nervous system. Like there's something very special about oysters and raw egg yolks for the nervous system.
I don't know
That
if oysters have it, but I know raw egg yolks have choline, which is like a superfood for the nervous system. But I don't
yeah,
know if oysters do. They have zinc. All
yeah,
minerals are like a superfood for the nervous system.
copper, yeah, yeah.
Magnesium and copper. Yeah. Magnesium is a huge one. So when we're in a state of stress, we use up so much magnesium, so much magnesium. And so we're constantly needing to replenish our magnesium. But then we have to be really mindful of the magnesium salt balance, because if you take in too much magnesium, it can throw off your salt. So I like to add a little bit of salt to water just to keep that in balance every now and then.
Sorry, choking on coffee here.
Oh,
No, that's a great point about salt. I feel like a lot of people are eating the wrong salt and or
yeah.
salt.
Yeah. Which salt do you recommend?
Mm, sorry, I put a bunch of cordyceps in my coffee and it got stuck in my throat.
Oh, that's all right.
Any white salt, so like Icelandic salt, Mordans, I think it's called Mordons. Because there's more tons
Yeah.
Tons, Duns Dons, so it's kind of
Okay.
confusing. Yeah, I like the white flake salt, and you just put it in a little grinder. But I've been messing around with like the little like purified seawater from like really deep under the ocean. It's a popular product called Kintone, but my
Okay.
friend at Blossom sells. They're just little ampules, and you break it open. It has all these
Okay.
trace minerals, but it's a significant amount of chloride. So I pop like 3 to 4 of those a day.
Oh,
But
cool.
I found the chloride and the salt like super important for stress and
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
constantly reading and studying, making stuff, and
All
probably
your
burning,
supplements. Yeah,
right?
it's important. It is important to fuel our bodies with the right nutrients, and salt and magnesium are like critical for that.
hmm
Yeah, I'll have
Yeah,
to check that supplement out. So you don't do gray Celtic salt?
I did, and then I heard something. This was like 4 years ago that it had heavy metals in it, so I looked into it, and it's really any
Oh.
salt with coloring, and it's not a make or break thing. Like depending on how you're detoxifying metals,
Mm-hmm.
but whether it's Himalayan salt, the pink is iron, or Celtic, the gray, can be aluminum, uh, all sorts of
Gross.
yeah.
Great. Well, magnesium detoxes heavy metals, specifically
Mhm.
aluminum, and so does sweating.
Yeah. Do you sweat in a sauna or
Yeah.
that? Cool. Yeah, I found that's really been beneficial for me to de-stress from traumatic situations. Like
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember doing it daily for months and months and months and months, like probably an hour to hour and a half a day, and that I could feel my system shifting into a restful, like peaceful state.
Yeah, sweating is huge. And so we actually release emotion in a few different ways, and sweating is one of them. Sweating, yawning, vomiting, um, pooping, and crying.
Interesting.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's what Adam Bergstrom said on my show. Like he said stretching too, like stretching and yawning he's big into.
And those release emotion. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty interesting. We have all these built-in mechanisms that we don't even, and biological functions that we aren't even, we don't realize that they're useful and necessary and important.
So they release like emotional trauma? Is that what you're
Hmm.
saying?
Yeah, and emotional stress, emotional energy through yawning,
Mm.
crying, pooping, vomiting. Oh, shaking is the other one, and sweating.
Wow.
So sometimes what I've had in sessions where I'm working with people and they will be processing through a trauma or a traumatic experience or even just the sensation of it, and their body will start shaking as they're releasing it because it's the nervous system discharging the energy that's been trapped in there for however long.
What about dancing? Because I know for years when I was down in Southern California, like they have like ecstatic dance clubs and stuff.
So funny. I think yeah, dancing is huge. And so we store, it's interesting too, if you watch how people dance, some people are really rigid and you can tell that they're holding on to a lot of stuff because they're not able to move freely. But dancing does help to like move some of that.
That reminds me, there's so many funny characters in the raw food community, and that's how I got into health like a decade ago. And there's
Hmm.
this one guy that was like Hippocrates. I think he actually founded Hippocrates Institute. Is Victoris Kulvinskis, crazy
Okay.
guy. There's a video of him dancing like on his 70 something birthday,
Oh my
71st,
gosh.
and he was like, he pretty pretty lean and flexible for being in his 70s. It might
That's
have even been
amazing.
he was like dancing like an orangutan just all over the place.
So awesome. That's so good.
Yeah, I guess the
Yeah,
wheatgrass
dancing is great.
uh,
Say that again, the wheatgrass what?
did him good, I guess. I don't know.
Perfect. Oh, that's funny. But that's why, like in kindergarten teachers will stop class and have a dance party with the kids because they have so much energy that they need to discharge. So that's why kids, go run and play, and then they'll have dance parties and they'll do sing alongs and they'll sing songs. And so, for all the parents that are homeschooling right now, do dance parties. It is so cathartic for your kiddos. It will help with connection and healthy attachment and helps them to feel safe. Sing alongs are really good too. Even for adults, it's really good to like move our bodies.
That makes me feel good about my childhood. I actually danced with my mom, so yeah,
Oh,
when I was
that's good.
a
That's awesome.
yeah. Then I grew up sculpting too with clay, and I would never have a
That's so
idea
cool.
I was gonna make. I would just go for it, and that felt pretty good on my brain as a kid.
Yeah, that's very therapeutic. That's really cool.
Mm. What do you do with your kids as far as art? Like
Um, what do we do with art? So
like
we
art?
do a lot of painting.
Mm.
We do a lot of like finger painting and we do a lot more play than art stuff. And we're outside a lot and using our bodies a lot, climbing things. We're in the dirt a lot. My daughter will like cover herself in mud. We're in Florida, so it's like hot here all the time. When you said, "Do you sweat in a sauna?" I almost was like, I sweat just going outside. It's December and it's like 80 degrees here right now.
Wow, it's
It's
like 30.
crazy. That's crazy. I know it's so hot and it's humid. Um, but I wish, sometimes I wish that it were cold. We had a cold snap in quotations last week where it got to like 60. So that was like really cold for us Floridians.
That's like the
um,
we'll get like in the 60s.
yeah, well, we'll have like freezes where it will get to the 40s, but it's not like it doesn't stay there.
Mm.
So people are like, "Oh man, people in Florida are so cold intolerant." And I'm like, "Yes, but it's 80 one day and then it's, 50 the next day. So you don't have any time to acclimate to the cold. And then it goes back up to 70 the next day after that."
Wow. Yeah, I was heavy into the cold therapy, which is really interesting, in relationship to the nervous system because
Mhm.
I feel like I was doing literally everything wrong. I mean, at least I wasn't fasting I think I was still skipping breakfast, but I was eating muscle meat and rice.
Hmm.
But it was really interesting because it felt like, so I was doing like 55-degree ice baths
Yeah.
under the sun for like 15 minutes, and I feel like it fortified my nervous system because I was driving around delivering cannabis for a couple of
Hmm.
years,
Yeah.
constant traffic, constantly going. I felt like I was enhanced. Like I felt like like my field was stronger and more resilient. Like it was like that
Hmm.
powerful feeling.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it can, they say one of the ways to like stimulate your vagus nerve is to splash cold water on your face or to take a cold shower.
Okay, yeah, there was a couple times where I dunked my face in like an ice bowl.
Hmm.
I don't know if this is doing anything. I didn't really feel anything from
I
it.
think I know. I think it does. I think that it does stimulate the nervous system. I mean, we have all of these nerves on our head, so when you're shocking it temporarily, stress is not necessarily bad for the nervous system. Stress can actually increase nervous system flexibility. The problem is when we get stuck in a state of chronic stress. So sometimes we need, if we're stuck in like a dorsal state, sometimes we need a short burst of stress to snap us out of dorsal and bring us back into a ventral state. So, like sprinting could even be really good for the nervous system because it helps you discharge that energy.
That makes sense. On the flip side, have you ever used like sensory deprivation, like float tanks?
I've done it once and I loved it. It was really cool.
Do you think that could be bad in like a certain state, or do you think it's? I mean, because it
Yeah, I
seems.
think for some people it could be really, really triggering. Even like meditation, for some people meditation can be super triggering because that stillness is not safe.
Yeah, I said that in one of my Facebook replies to someone, and a couple people laughed at that. Like, that's like that's ridiculous.
Mhm.
But I mean, everything in context, right?
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, meditation can create an opportunity for, things to start surfacing, or just being still was not safe. And so our body remembers that.
Which nervous system state would a person be in for that to be the case?
I
Do you know?
think it could be either one. So if you're in a sympathetic state, trying to sit still would be really challenging because stillness feels like death. But if you're in a dorsal state, it might be easier to be in a still state, but it might reinforce more of that sort of dorsal.
Interesting. Yeah, I see a lot of people using like, psychedelics and doing treatments like that, or using
Mhm.
a lot of like maybe breathing practices, which maybe they're blowing off all their CO2 that's anti-stress, the
Mhm.
Wim Hof method or whatever. And
Yeah.
a lot of these practices can push people out of balance, especially if they're
Mhm.
magnesium deficient. Right?
Oh yeah, of course. And it can further, like if somebody has a tendency toward dissociation, meditation can be um, another tool or a vehicle for them to dissociate further. And so people who are like, "Oh, I'm really, I meditate for hours and hours a day," that might not be a good thing because I wonder then, well, what are you avoiding? What are you avoiding in your everyday waking life that you are able to stay in that state of meditation for so long?
Yeah.
And that's not always the case. I want to clarify. Sometimes it isn't, but a lot of times it can be.
Do you think like they're avoiding their body? Because I feel like people are either completely out of their body or only in their body, and there's like a balance, I
Hmm.
guess.
Yeah, and dissociation, sometimes it's good to distract yourself. There's nothing wrong with that inherently, but you want to also move and sort of oscillate between being present and dissociated and, maybe hypervigilant in some cases. We don't want to turn off these protective mechanisms because we wouldn't be able to operate in this world.
Mhm. Yeah, you just got to kill your ego. That's all.
Get rid of it.
It's
We
the
don't need
solution.
that thing anyway.
That's pretty funny. All these extremes. Yeah.
Hmm.
Awesome, Mandy. Well, I think we covered everything. This was really fun.
Oh, good. Me too. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks so much. So you're your Instagram. We have a website, mandywellness.com, and you said you're like redoing it, or
Yeah, I'm like focusing all my attention elsewhere, so my website doesn't have a lot of attention. I post mostly on Instagram, so
oh,
that's where, and on my Facebook too, on my Heal with Mandy Facebook page.
cool. Yeah, I'll link both of those below. Um, awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for your time, and I'm sure we'll do it again at some point.
Cool. Thanks so much, Matt.
Thanks, Mandy. Stick around as I'll close out the show.
Okay.
Wow, that was awesome. I love that Mandy gave so many practical tips that people can implement. I like that she said that nervous system healing is slow, because I'm probably not alone when I say I don't want to hear that. I want quick results. I want it yesterday. Let me stack as many things as possible to get it done now. But that's not how it works with the nervous system. And I could relate. I mean, we've all had crappy stuff happen to us in our life. Bad people did bad things to us. And whatever it was, an accident, whatever traumatic event, it takes time to heal from that. And of course, there are things that can facilitate that, like a metabolism supporting nutrition, lifestyle program, lowering your non-native EMF exposure, both from Wi-Fi and from artificial light, which is a form of non-native EMF that is harmful to us. Maybe switching over your water to a less stressful water, a less hard water, and really taking account of all the different areas of your life that are added stressors. Because I found in my life, the more I reduce all of those areas, and it's taken 10 years. It's not just like, oh, I'm just going to do it all at once. It took me 10 years to kind of catalog everything and say, oh, okay, this is a 5-year plan, this is a 10-year plan, this is a 3-year plan, and implement and work my butt off to get there. Because unfortunately, in today's world, unless you want to, be homeless in Hawaii and live off coconuts, which people have done, but I don't know if that's, necessarily the best decision, because people need help. And I don't know how you can help people just living in the jungle, living off coconuts and fruit. So there's definitely a level of engagement that is required right now to change the system, to buck the system, to pull the rug out from under, they. But it takes time, it takes work, and it starts with ourselves and really getting our nervous system to, as Mandy called it, a flexible state. She said the goal is to be flexible, not to be stuck in any one state. So you can go between them. And getting to that place might take years. And it might be, a healing process, like a lot of people say, where 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and that's okay. Because eventually that'll change, where it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And then from then on, it's just 2, 3 steps forward forever. And I truly believe that if you get everything in order, and I share a lot of information about many different areas of health, it's really unlimited, and you don't want to get, analysis paralysis stuck, where it's just, oh, there's so many things to do, so I'm going to do nothing. No, it's just, putting a little sugar in your coffee, drinking coffee after breakfast, tuning into yourself, tuning into your nervous system after you eat breakfast, and saying, okay, is 10 minutes enough? Is 20 minutes enough time to drink coffee? Is 30 minutes is an hour? Today, should I wait 2 hours before I do coffee? Should I not do coffee at all? This is what I do myself, and it works really well because I'm really in tune with my nervous system. And so, I just get still and feel my nervous system. And most of the time it wants coffee because I prioritize sleep. And if your sleep is well, you're going to bed well before midnight. I shoot for 11 p.m. and I don't feel the same if I go to bed at midnight or 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. Did that for years. Have a lot of night owl friends. God love them. But, I'm not a night owl. I don't believe it's physiologically healthy to be one either. There's a lot of research showing that, 10 p.m. to midnight is more restorative sleep. And I'm sure my return guest Adam Bergstrom would have something really clever to say about that, because he's an awesome contrarian. I think he said the ultimate goal is to not sleep at all, but I don't know. I love sleep. And I found it really interesting what Mandy said about the vagus nerve, because that whole vagus nerve thing is trending. You guys have noticed in like the biohacking world or the alternative health world, it's like vagus nerve, stimulate it, all this stuff about the vagus nerve. But I feel like with most things in health, the context is often missing. And so I thought it was really fascinating. Another favorite part of the show for me was when she responded to that question, do we want to stimulate our vagus nerve? And she said, if we're in dorsal, stimulating it would be helpful. But if we're in sympathetic, then stimulating it might be too much. So again, we're back to, tuning in. I feel like that makes me think about coffee and caffeine. And caffeine can be coffee and caffeine, not decaf coffee, can be an amazing tool in your metabolic healing journey, because it does act like thyroid hormone. It acts like progesterone. It has so many beneficial effects if there is food in the system and the blood sugar is regulated. And I've had countless friends. My friend Ryan Parr said that he had to quit coffee because he kept getting the jitters. He felt like it was making him more stressed. And that makes me think back to my OMAD days, my 1 hour eating window days, when I was drinking the coffee black, no food, only 1 hour of eating a day. And that combined with megadosing algae oil, omega-3 DHA supplement almost killed me, literally almost killed me. But back to the Ryan story, he messaged me and he said, Matt, this is amazing. I had the jitters. I thought I'd have to quit coffee for good, but I was seeing your stuff on Instagram and social media about coffee, and I started to eat breakfast again, and I started to focus more on my metabolic health, and now I introduced coffee back in 0 jitters after thinking that he had to quit it for life. So again, extremes. That's been kind of a theme for me over the last few years. It's like, okay, extremes, like, are they sustainable in any aspect of life? The answer is no, they're not, because there will be a relapse. There will be, a rebounding effect. And, with eating disorders, call that gorging, and it's not healthy. So try to find your balance point and try to implement things that bring you more into balance, and that tuning into your body is a really important skill to have, and not being, anti-coffee because you read some meme about it wrecking your adrenals or whatever. Just insane. So anyway, if you want to check out Mandy, I think her Instagram is awesome. I'm going to put the link below. It is just Heal with Mandy. And her website, I think she mentioned that she's touching that up. It's just mandywellness.com. And I'll put a link below to that as well. And thank you guys so much for listening. I'd definitely like to have Mandy back, because I feel like there were a lot of things we could have touched on, but just didn't have the time for it. And remember, sweating, yawning, vomiting, defecating, crying, stretching, shaking, these are all ways to release emotion and trauma. The vomiting one's probably the least enjoyable. But I know Adam Bergstrom focuses a lot on the stretching and yawning, which is interesting because I remember yawning my whole life for seemingly no reason. I wasn't tired. I would yawn like middle of the day. And some people say there's a physiological reason for that. Like your body needs more oxygen. I could see that, but I feel like I'm at the point where I utilize oxygen pretty well, and I'm on the CLF protocol. So I still kind of yawn here and there. And so I wonder, what that's caused by. But anyway, I'm fascinated by yawning. I think it's really interesting. And little Mitolife update. Thank you guys so much for your patience. We got COVID. We have, the election. We have all these riots. Cities are burning down. This year has just been wild. And so everything's just been slower. With people freaking out, there's more supplies being used. Bottles are hard to get, even. Lids are hard to get, things you wouldn't even think of. And so I'm shifting the whole Mitolife business to a more sustainable route and switch all the products to packages versus plastic bottles, so that in the future, just because I can't get lids doesn't mean there's going to be a month delay for dissolve it all or something. So the current ETA is, if you're listening to this episode releasing on Christmas, December 25th, 2020, then vitamin K should be back in stock by then. Dissolve it all is estimated to be back in stock the last week of January, and the same with oyster extract. And the probiotic should be back by mid-January. And then I'm working on a lot of new products. That's why I'm not offering consultations. I get so many messages about that. And on average, I open it up about every 2 months or so. So I'm going to try to open it up in January at some point. I would announce it on Instagram, but I'm just slammed. I'm trying to come out with new products that I feel are really important, that are missing pieces. When people message me and say, Matt, I'm kind of detoxing on your protocol, what do I do? There's certain foundational things that I really want to provide. And so I'm working as hard as I can to get those foundational things out there, like water filters, affordable ones, not crazy expensive ones. So I'll be sharing more about that soon. If you want to support the show and my work, you can go to matt-blackburn.com, and I have all the products that I use myself there with discount codes for most of them. And I'm constantly adding and editing that site. And then my products, mitolife.co. And again, if you're listening to this and things are still not in stock, have patience. Thank you so much. Black Friday with COVID 1984. So we'll get back up and running soon. Today's quote is by Dr. Teresa Covert from her book Gaslighting, the Narcissist's Favorite Tool of Manipulation. Cognitive dissonance is a term used to describe the feelings of discomfort. This discomfort occurs when a person holds contradictory ideas or beliefs in their minds at the same time. In psychology, cognitive dissonance is a theory centered on how people try to reach a state of inner consistency. Cognitive dissonance is the psychological stress experienced by a person who holds two contradictory beliefs or ideas in mind. A psychologist named Leon Festinger first proposed the theory. He proposed that people have an inner need to ensure what their beliefs are and what their behaviors are consistent. When there is an inconsistency, a state of internal disharmony arises, and this state is something people strive to avoid.